through the Linktree origin story and maybe your personal background a little before then?
Sure. Thanks for having me, everyone. So Linktree was founded in about 2016. My two co-founders, my brother Alex and our buddy Nikki. We were running a digital marketing agency at the time called Bolster, which serviced the music and entertainment industry. So all of our clients were artists, record labels, music festivals, and the like, doing performance marketing, social media, content marketing for those folks. And before that, we ran an artist management company and kind of got into the digital marketing space. So the founding story being that we were running campaigns for a few artists and music festivals like Splendor in the Grass and Flume at the time, a few others, and directing people to multiple places in the music industry. It's widely fragmented. You don't own your customer journey in music. Streaming, merch, ticketing all live on multiple platforms. And so changing links in bios was cumbersome, and directing people to multiple places multiple times a day, often to really shitty websites that didn't convert, was really annoying. And so we literally just said, I think there was one day we did it 5 times for a client, and it was like, there's definitely an F-bomb in there. There has to be a better way. And we just hired a developer who didn't have enough work. We took a punt on hiring him for a project, and he did a prototype overnight. The next day we had what is a form of Linktree, list of links that directs to multiple places, admin panel behind the ground that you could coordinate the links. And off we went. We just used it for ourselves within the agency. It was really just a product to use for our clients. What we quickly realized is it wasn't just about the music industry being fragmented. The whole internet is fragmented. We quickly learned there's something like, I think from 2015 to maybe last year, the average social media accounts per person in the world has gone from like 4 to 9. And so when you think about you're building audiences, you are building a brand and audiences across social media, and you're trying to direct them to multiple places that you want to monetize or engage with them, it's wildly fragmented. So we quickly realized it wasn't just music folks that were using it for. I think one of the first signups we had a few months after we launched was the Melbourne City Council, which was quite odd, but made sense. They're doing different things, and kind of off we went from there. So that's kind of the first founding story. But fast forward now, we are a team of about 230 people around the world with 30 million users and staff around the world as well.
Thank you. Alex.
Thanks, Tolu. Hey, everyone. So my background's a bit different. I was in university studying commerce. I was actually an accountant for 4 months, and always into startups, watching YC videos, growing up like with my dad, who's an entrepreneur, just always really interested in the area. And I came across this great idea, which was, my girlfriend's got a lot of dresses, but she, doesn't want to wear them because of photos. This is an underutilized asset. So let's work with my brother and not my girlfriend to create a dress rental startup to essentially help Airbnb for dresses. And we were both non-technical, so we decided, let's teach ourselves to code. Spent $15 on a Udemy course to teach ourselves how to code, lock ourselves in our basement for 3 months, came out with this amazing dress rental app, which we hadn't spoken to any women, obviously, because that's how you make a successful product. And we launched it and realized, okay, is this what we want to work on for the next decade of our lives? And we realized it wasn't really our life's work. We love helping people. We love like building products and solving problems, but not this problem. So we ended up killing that idea and decided, like, what are we passionate about? What do we care about? And I have celiac disease, so very passionate about gut health, but also just chronic condition management. And we're both really interested in psychology and behavioral science and behavioral health. So we're like, how can we use our technical skills to, help people in that way? And we came across hypnotherapy, which essentially, to people who are skeptical in the audience right now, hypnosis is essentially just heightened absorption that makes therapy better. So it's not a therapy itself, but you couple that with cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever, it makes it more effective. And so okay, there's something interesting there. This is really effective. And there's a huge amount of controlled research and clinical studies showing that it works for conditions like IBS and anxiety, depression, smoking cessation. But because of the misconceptions and the lack of access to qualified practitioners, most people don't have access to hypnotherapy and are suffering and struggling with these conditions, without more effective help and avoiding foods they love to feel better and other, semi-reliable ways of managing their condition. And so we decided to focus on that. So since then, we've partnered with researchers from some of the world leading research universities like Monash University, Baylor University in the US, to essentially take their evidence-based therapy approaches, so primarily for irritable bowel syndrome today, and make that more accessible to people across the world. So we've been global from day one. And since then, first couple of years, we went through StartMate, we went through Y Combinator, raised millions of dollars in funding, but we're now helping, I think, 28,000 paying people manage their irritable bowel syndrome, quit smoking, live better lives, and now a team of 30 of us.
A question for me, more just out of personal interest than anything. What did that customer discovery look like to begin? So, you have IBS as, the condition that you're hoping to treat, that you feel a personal connection with. You've got hypnosis or hypnosis-enabled digital therapeutics as the modality. How did you go about testing, the best way to deliver and combine those two things, the indication and the therapeutic modality?
I think for the actual understanding the users and understanding therapy, we just did the opposite of what we did for Covered, our dress venture up. We spoke to users, we interacted with the community, we went and spoke to healthcare practitioners to understand what is it like to live with IBS? What is it like to live with these conditions? What are they seeking? And then we went to hypnotherapists. We understood, the quality differences. We understood when it works and when it doesn't, and what it is like to be a patient searching for a solution like that. But the actual implementation was largely just based on the existing evidence. So we wanted to make sure that we are building an evidence-based digital therapeutic. And so it was incredibly important for us. Yes, over time, we'll learn how to iterate and improve and make it better. But there's, a randomized controlled trial from Monash University showing how effective this is. Let's partner with the person who ran that randomized controlled trial and deliver that through an app, learning from what works for consumer products, and then iterate from there.
And before I let you go, of all of the 4 months that you spent as an accountant, what was your favorite moment?
It was pretty fun. Everyone hates. It was good. I being accountant was fun. I think maybe the Christmas party at the first week was good.
You had a Christmas party after 4 months?
Yeah, well, we started in the next year, but you had the Christmas party before you were allowed to attend. So I technically wasn't working at that point, but that was good. All the grads hanging out with everybody. That's when accountant was forever, right? That 4 months of the first year.
It's like the danger of attending the Christmas party before you've technically started in the job. Tom, tell us about the Heidi origin stories.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I think so. I'm a doctor by background, was a vascular surgery trainee, similar to Anthony and Alex. I had a personal problem, so I was seeing patients who had seen the GP, maybe had a sore leg or a sore foot, and often had very clear symptoms for a doctor of vascular compromise. So they had a big artery that was about to be blocked in their leg. Very bad news for anyone that knows anything about that. Toes cut off, leg cut off, very nasty, high consequence issues. And unfortunately, it's just not super common. So a lot of GPs would miss it. And then I would see it in the hospital in the emergency department and only have very few options to deliver to the patient. So fortunately, I'd had some previous experience at another business like these guys, building software, maths background, interested in AI, knowledge graphs, all sorts of stuff. And so the initial idea we had in 2020 was we should support the way that GPs do diagnosis in some simple ways, whether that's listening to their consult and suggesting questions or features that they might have missed for this patient based on their demographics. Just try and support the GP to do a better job, and then hopefully also make the doctor more productive in doing that. So that was kind of the rough idea where we started. Went down a big product discovery route, realized most doctors think they make no mistakes. And so it was going to be pretty hard to sell them a system that would record them and suggest. It was going to be very complicated. And in the end, we realized that the big opportunity was actually to just reinvent the whole underlying infrastructure of the way GPs work. So you would still have this sort of really high-tech AI as the underlying substrate that would power the whole system. But then a GP and a patient would basically completely interface on Heidi. So as a patient, you book with Heidi, we ask you some questions. that kind of neat, elegant experience as a patient actually is the basis of how we support the doctor. So when they open the patient file, they see a summary of a pre-written note that we've written based on what we know about you. We've also told them what diagnoses to consider. So, you know, a peripheral vascular disease in my vascular surgeon case, or for other specialties, kind of niche diagnoses that they wouldn't otherwise consider. And it works neatly and integrates with their systems. And so, yeah, we sort of went on a big product discovery journey, started from a kind of prototype that I built for an education use case, very random, unimportant. From there, in the last 12 months, have built really hard, and in our first consult managed to get the diagnosis right. So it was thunderstorm asthma, even though we were not connected to the weather. So I was pretty proud of Heidi in that moment. And yeah, we're going well. We've got 2 clinics in private beta so far. We're selling into most of the big clinic groups in Australia at the moment, at various stages, and also spent a lot of the last 12 months selling into the US and have a lot of opinions and experiences doing that. So happy to share that in the session. Yeah.
And so an interesting thing here is, like, we do have, call it 2 sets of experiences. We've got, you know, Linktree and Mindset, which, you know, sell direct to consumer and have sold globally from day one. And we have Heidi with B2B software in more regulated markets. So we're going to chat a bit about that launch experience, preparing for launch. So maybe let's start with Anthony and Alex. Would love to hear in each of your experiences what preparing your product for that first day of public launch entailed. And then once you launched and you had, you know, customers purchasing your product in Australia, in the US, in, you know, Brazil, in Indonesia, in Western Europe, how you started to process the data to then, I suppose, evaluate success of launch and, you know, what to do next. So maybe starting with Anthony.
Sure. So yeah, we never really had like a formal launch. We just kind of rolled out the product to clients, gave it to them to use, just iterated as we went to make it more self-serve sign up. Originally, the first version was like, you know, sign in with Instagram. Like, oh shit, we shouldn't be relying on Instagram login, email, password, etc. Become a lot more advanced since then, and you know, elevated out of being just a link in bio for social. But we're global from day one, and we gave it to some of our clients. Some of them were international artists like Major Lazer and Diplo. And given we sat across social media buyers, there was already inherently viral nature started happening. So we did no paid marketing for quite a few years, and we had this flywheel happening. So we kind of started seeing, you know, when pockets of markets would sign up, not so much by location. Location happened sort of like first the US, then Brazil and Indonesia, but more by vertical. So music, and then like restaurants, and then real estate agents, that kind of thing started happening. But the big moment for us was when maybe 6 or 7 months after we launched, like December 2016, someone added it to Product Hunt. It wasn't us, and it's a night before our sister's wedding. And so we went from a couple hundred signups a day to 3,000 or 4,000 overnight. I was a bit of like, what do we do here? Like customer support requests coming in. I don't know. And was still part of we didn't have staff dedicated to Linktree at that point. And so it wasn't long after that then Alicia Keys' team signed up for the product. And this is when some big high profile users started signing up. And that sort of really also drive the flywheel for us. And so that's when it was, we started realizing that, okay, we need to drive bigger growth. It was like, that's going to be our big tick, focus on the high profile creators, white glove treatment for them, whatever it takes to get them on board and help them out. So, and not long after, Brazil started taking off. It was a similar thing. We didn't have any hand in it. A TV presenter, celebrity, model, hybrid in Brazil signed up for it, and she drove hundreds of thousands of signups. And so, yeah, Brazil is still today our second biggest market, followed by Indonesia and India in terms of signups, not so much in revenue. But yeah, I mean, can sort of talk for a lot of that. But we put boots on the ground in those markets because we needed someone that knew the market. You know, we're 3 white guys in Australia building a global product. You need to be empathetic to what's happening in this market, what makes sense, not just language-wise, like you can't use certain emojis in some markets, or they mean different things, just all those kind of things you have no idea about to actually have somebody who's from those areas to help you out.
And we'll definitely circle back on a bunch of those themes. But the interesting thing for me is, was it always the ambition that you would have a product that, tens of millions of users would use? And, when you saw that you might be on that path, how did you almost like close that feedback loop into product? It's like, oh, kind of crap, like millions of people will use this before too long. What changes, if any, do we need to make to the product roadmap to ensure that, at that scale, we're competitive, and especially in a category that was maturing quite quickly, almost in parallel?
Yeah, so there's a few things we did along the way. The use case is obviously pretty universal. A few nuances, but some things we did were just like more things we said no to than saying yes to. So things like custom domains. I want to take out the link thread in my bio and have, myname.com/whatever. Like, no matter how much you're paying, no, that's our branding. Remove the logo. That's staying in the logo until like a certain paid plan. So things like that helped drive things globally. Also, being this sort of connective tissue across social, you're inherently, you kind of have to adhere to a lot of social media platforms' terms and conditions, right? And so we invested pretty heavily early on in trust and safety teams and a general counsel. I guess, not so much regulated like medical fields, but that was our version of regulation. And so we needed to make sure that we weren't, we were ahead of the field, and it was all about building brand equity in the space we were doing. And so that was some more stuff we said no to, but also investing in those people so that, we had these community standards that, things like misinformation, what you can and can't link to, that we were adhering to. And obviously each market is different to what those things mean. So kind of having to make sure you're tapping into that.
Phenomenal. Alex, what did launch look like for Mindset, and how did you respond to servicing IBS patients all across the world?
For us, like early on, it was just naivety, to be honest. Like when we launched, it was like, oh, we're an app, just tick all the countries and launch, and that's what you do. So we didn't really put much thought into it. And we didn't really think anything outside of like, oh, our product is, also to give context, our product is audio delivered, like voice therapy. And so it's in English. We don't want to do any work. We're not going to translate our ads. We're not going to translate the app. So like English speaking, let's do that. Like only target that. And we just launched it. There wasn't really a huge amount of thought put into it in the first launch. We did end up though, like getting a huge amount of like success from that, because I think the second month, so I think first month maybe had 100 users or 20 users just like find us. We're in support communities, talking to people, talking to like implicitly they're from multiple countries in Reddit. It's not like, oh, Reddit IBS in Australia only. So implicitly you're going to get people from different countries. But in month 2, we had app of the day in the UK for whatever reason. Like we didn't contact them, they just did it. We thought, like to your point, like around like thousands of people, like I think we had 11,000 downloads in a day, where every day before we're getting like 4 or 5. So we thought we were getting hacked, to be honest. We're like, holy shit, we're getting hacked. Like, what are we doing? Do we turn it off? Do we shut down the server? Like, what do we do? But people started to pay, and we're like, wow, this is amazing. So after that, we just sort of like went where the data went with us. So for us, it was like, okay, we're not going to do any work to support this. Like we want to focus, and being international could easily mean that we lose our focus and we're like stretched too thin. There was 2 of us for like 2 years. So like, okay, we're only going to like stay in these countries if it means we can only like, we're not making more ads. We're not going to translate it, all of the stuff I've said previously. And it kept working. And then we just doubled down on where the success lies. So in UK, after that demo day, like we still have users in the UK. It's our like 3rd biggest market, but it's not as profitable as the US. It's not as like, as good as a market as Australia. Like based on the data, we just change where, because a lot of our growth today comes from paid ads. If it's not as effective, we'll just move money around and grow elsewhere. And so just like moving money to where it is most effectively deployed. And if that's in Australia, the money goes to Australia. If that's in UK, the money goes to UK, and just follow where that like cycle lives.
Excellent. Now, moving in a sense to a different part of the spectrum, B2B software in regulated markets. Tom, I'd love to hear your perspective around, customer discovery in the plan of building a global product in a series of markets where the dynamics are not homogenous, which is to say heterogeneous. It's, how did you figure out what to build, what the right product was, and then how to stage that global rollout?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I definitely have dreams of what you guys are describing. Just turn it on, it works. Like that's the dream. I think, I think fundamentally, like in principle, what we've built does translate anywhere. There's no reason why something that supports a doctor doing diagnosis, like roughly speaking, maybe besides infectious diseases, most humans have similar pathology, so it does translate. So like at a basic level seems easy. I think the complications obviously they start to come in when you really think about exactly where your product or feature fits into that person's workflow in the country where they are and how they practice and how the funding system works and what other softwares there are and all sorts of different specific regional things. So I think like pretty intentionally from the outset, from that like core infrastructure perspective, we always built it with the view that it would be translatable in other markets. So just a simple example, like that infectious diseases example, there's a disease called Ross River virus, which is like very Victoria specific. If you're near the Ross River or been in like associated regions, like it's very easy for us in the neural net architecture we built to influence the epidemiology of different diseases in different areas. So if someone is in the US, Heidi could still think they have Ross River virus, but Heidi would definitely ask if they've been in that region before even ever considering that diagnosis. But if that patient was in Australia, it would consider that diagnosis even before having asked the location. So it's like very nuanced in terms of the technical stuff. We spend a lot of time making sure that we are kind of region unlocked by default. So that's like the first basic level. And I think you guys are always unlocked. So, back to the dreams. And then the second part is with B2B, obviously talking to those businesses. So we did On Deck, which is a kind of US version of StartMate. Whilst I was working as a doctor and raising our seed round, which I don't recommend, but spoke to so many different US-based health companies and also health founders, and pretty much did almost like a year degree in like how the health system works, like understanding the payers and the way the insurance works, and like trying to get a conceptual framework of like how their system works and where Heidi might fit. And I think back to focus and resources, the other like kind of ball you're juggling is when do you actually make that investment of actually commercializing the product? So when you're in a regulated market, there's just like it's like a bet you're making, like a fixed cost just to get live. Like you have to submit to FDA, you have to make sure your T's and C's are right, you have to make sure you register with all the different state health authorities and like all these other things that, the way I view it is just like there's a fixed cost to go there. And when do we make that strategic choice? The other thing as well is internally, like we still had a small team, but pretty much the US as a category was relegated to me and my co-founder Waleed, and we were investigating that, but we weren't distracting anyone else in the whole company about that until we felt like we'd figured out what the correct timing and strategy was. And I think I'll kind of spoil the ending, but in the end, we've decided that in the short term, so in the next like 1 to 2 years, we're going to be focused on Australia, but we have figured out where to go in the US. It's just complicated enough that we can't spread the team yet. We want to create really strong base in Australia. And we've realized the biggest sort of strategic moat for us will be the actual data we get from patients. So it makes sense for us to start expanding into different regions as we actually build a really differentiated underlying AI that is just so much better than anything that exists in other places, which I think we will do in the next few years. And then like it becomes easier to commercialize because you can say, look at what we've done in clinics in Australia. And even though there's lots of complications to get live, people will be willing to go through it because of how appealing that actual live performance is, like the thunderstorm mass, for example. So we want hundreds of those examples, and then we can sell into any market. Yeah.
And so we've already a heap of things on a founder's plate, and you and Waleed setting up almost like this skunkworks project to just casually figure out the US. How did you think about prioritizing your own time or scaling your own resource going through that exercise?
Yeah, I don't know. I probably have an unhealthy relationship with my time. Coming from surgical background, like we would just wake up at all hours of the day. I'd have my 6 till 7 kind of toxic schedule for Heidi, and then we would just accept meetings as they came in. whenever they came in on the US schedule. And we just had a Calendly link that had pretty much 24-hour availability because it was just too hard to schedule with people. So it's like, whatever, I'll just accept it. I think in terms of scaling my resource, yeah, I think it honestly like was just finding amazing people. Obviously, once had some funding and Blackbird backed us was amazing because then brought on like other amazing doctors and people that could, you know, start to eat away at things where I felt like I had to be there for every little decision, just like abstract myself away a little bit. But at the same time, I still feel responsibility to be in the weeds on most things, even to this day. Anything that's really going to move the needle on whether or not Heidi succeeds or not. I guess the short answer is I haven't figured out how to do it really well yet. Work more? I don't know. Yeah.
And I think there's also this interesting dynamic where, you know, Australian companies go about offshore, call it customer discovery or market mapping. I think historically there's been almost a bit of a, you know, imposter syndrome. It's like, oh, surely the thing that they're building like in this category in the US is better. So like, let's try and succeed here. And then, you know, we'll figure out what happens next. But, you know, I think, you know, having seen, you know, the insides of what happens at Heidi, it's like a consistent theme, and all of these three companies are examples of, you know, actually like what we build in Australia can be the best, like right from the beginning, and, you know, setting yourself on the right foot, you know, a global best-in-class product, whether or not you choose to launch globally at the beginning, is probably the right path to almost earn the right to succeed at any point as a global business.
I don't know. This is maybe a bit of a controversial opinion. I'd love to hear what you guys think. I actually think in Australia, because it's a more nascent ecosystem, it's actually harder to get funding and get resources. So from my experience, and I'm not trying to shit on other founders, but in the US, being there, like when I looked at our competitors, there was this like I just was some sort of glossiness. I thought like we weren't in the same league as them. And I actually left feeling like we were actually better than them. Like we were grittier, our product was better, like the team was better, because like it was almost like we were early to it. Like there was more density of talent and effort and resources here. Now, obviously, still, like I said, you have to be careful about when you make the move. But yeah, I think so. Maybe the opposite of what I expected. Yeah,
That's exactly what I was hoping to provoke
yeah,
out of you.
yeah.
I should have done this earlier, but obviously we have a Slido link. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to send them through. We'll leave a couple of minutes toward the end. But yeah, so my next question, this concept of resource allocation, when you've got data coming at you from everywhere, opportunities to grow, opportunities to expand product. You know, Alex, you spoke about, you know, directing paid marketing. But, you know, Anthony, with customers in Brazil, customers in Indonesia, and, you know, this, you know, broader macroeconomic theme of the need to become more efficient as a business, as a startup, how have you gone about that balance? It's, you know, we can grow in, you know, somewhere like Brazil, but should we grow in Brazil, or should we allocate capital elsewhere?
Great question. Yeah, through the last few years of hyperscaling, so just for context, we were bootstrapped until mid-2020, or profitable, team of maybe 10 people, Linktree. We did our first raise mid to late 2020 and done 3 raises in total, and went from about 4 million users in early 2020 to sort of 12 and then 24 and now about 30 million. So really, really big scaling for the last few years. COVID tailwinds helped a lot of that, but we also had a big head start on the market, you know, ahead of it, which is sort of COVID just, I guess, propelled that a lot quicker. And so with that presents hundreds of opportunities. We needed to be everywhere at once. We need to do all these things. We're capturing this market. We need to focus on, like, which is, you know, kind of like being in a washing machine. And with that, of course, US has always been the biggest market, will continue to be. And those other markets you mentioned were scaling sort of one by one. You see them start upticking. I think it was early last year, late 21, India started picking up momentum. So of course, it's like, well, let's do some paid marketing and see if we can grow a bit more there. And let's put some boots on the ground. And then if it works, then we can figure out how we put engineering resources. And it's that thing of like, we wanted to test the waters, but we put country manager on in each of those markets to help with localized partnerships. We did, ended up doing localized pricing for each of those markets. So at the time, we only had one payment plan of $6 a month. Now we've got 3. But it was like, in Brazil and Indonesia, they're not going to pay $6 US per month for the product. So benchmarked against other subscription services that had launched there, like Spotify or Netflix or whatever had launched, to try and figure out the pricing. And we had thousands of signups a day in those markets. Once we launched localized pricing, you're able to get some form of stat sig as to if it's working or not. But of course, it's only one step of the way. Like, okay, well, the signing up, converting from free to pro, we're a freemium product. So it's starting to work a little bit, but ultimately, in these markets, you got to think about your operations, your people on the ground, localized payment methods, not just pricing. It's like, okay, well, in Indonesia, and India, they might use phone credits for payments, not if they have a credit card. PayPal, GPay, how we set up kind of works. So ultimately, you got to go all the way and invest in that market to be a proper revenue driving market, or kind of go halfway. And so localized pricing was fine, local content partnerships, but unless we're going to put engineering resources into payment methods, setting up shop there properly operationally, all this stuff, was never going to be a big revenue driving. Those 3 were never going to be revenue driving markets. And so in the age of capital efficiency and having to do more with less, we made a decision early last year that we are going to just focus on our core revenue driving markets. And still today, those markets still drive high signups. We're just not putting tons of focus on them. They just do what they do, shift paid marketing to the core revenue driving markets, which are US, Canada, Australia, Brazil, England, UK, and then kind of go back to drawing board on when it makes sense. So yeah, and obviously, it's that thing of resource allocation. Like, we still haven't captured our core market of the US fully. There's still tons of room to grow. Like, we have a vision of everybody in the world has a Linktree. It's not just for creators. And so there's hundreds of millions of people that still sign up for the product before we even think about non-English speaking markets. Even just things like performance, it's all well and good to create a product that works on fast internet connection of the US and maybe Australia, depending who you ask. But, in some of those markets, so mobile first, they might only have a 3G, maybe 4G connection. You got to build a product that loads lightweight. So all these kind of complications, you're like, oh shit, people are signing up there, but actually, if we want to go, we need to go deep and put in proper resources. So so having to make the decision to do that.
Random question, maybe a tangent. As a consumer-facing product that is quite flexible, were there any unexpected differences in the way that your users interacted with the product? If we were to compare, say, the US on one end, or an emerging market on the other end, like new cases that were almost unveiled to you by your users.
Yeah, so Indonesia, big on social commerce. So folks linking out to Shopee, like Shopee Indonesia was a user of ours as well, but that was the predominant use case, was linking up to platforms like Shopee and Tokopedia, and that was a huge one. And it's obvious because you hear a lot about it now, but a few years ago it was like, oh shit, this social commerce thing is big. I wonder if it's going to take off in the US and Australia. And so that was an eye opener, and that was probably the biggest one, I'd say. But also, we had heaps of moments of being banned by ISPs in Indonesia and the UK, and I think they're still banned in Russia as well altogether, because of things like a user linking to something that might be using a VPN to get around it, but they're linking to something that they shouldn't be linking to in Indonesia or India, and just cut off from that market from an ISP. You have to kind of go through this whole legal process. So there's about that stuff.
Very cool. Do I have until 45 or the hour? Okay, so okay. Maybe I'll jump to audience questions. Just give me 1 second. Okay, good. This was going to be my next question anyway. So the question of fundraising, 3 companies at different stages with experience, speaking and raising from offshore investors, and often the path to becoming a globally successful company will involve an offshore capital partner. Maybe I'll start with Tom, and then we can work back this way. How do offshore funders, whether venture funders, growth equity funders, etc., experience Australianness Is it an advantage? Is it a disadvantage? You know, are there adverse perceptions that you feel like you need to explain away?
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, so for context, recently went to the US, like raised our seed round middle of 2021. Not quite there yet, but looking to raise more money soon. So starting to like sort of seed the network, speak to people that were interested. And I was saying to Alex and Tolly before that at least here you could just do like a lot of cold outreach. You know, people assume the best. They take a meeting. But I found in the US is kind of interesting. Like they really liked warm intros. So I think first step was just like culturally, like how do you actually get in touch with people? So, but I worked around that with mainly persistence and extremely outrageous introduction emails that got me the meeting. Like I stopped cutting off legs and built Heidi. That was the intro sentence. Anyway, so once you get past that initial barrier, I do think there are some investors just their mandate. It's like I only invest in US based companies. So there are some big filters. That was fairly uncommon. Most of the more sophisticated, like big VCs, I found were like fairly flexible. Didn't really have like a strong opinion. I think definitely the initial impression is like, this is weird. You're in Australia. This doesn't make sense. Are you ever like, where is Australia? How does that work? You're like, well, how much? What's the salary that people earn there? Like, how much can you really charge for this stuff over there? It's like, it's not. It's first world. Anyway, so way better than the infrastructure you guys have. So anyway, we once you get past like that initial barrier, I think then it becomes sort of more about just like normal business stuff, like what's your market, how big is it? I think for us, because we're sort of like deep tech enough that it's interesting, like an interesting, challenging problem, basically to try to like solve what a doctor does day to day, like, you know, take someone's history, do their management diagnosis, that I think we're lucky in that we can attract interest from a class of investors that otherwise wouldn't, and they think very laterally when they think about us and think broadly about how we could exist in the world. But I don't know, I assume for SaaS products, it's a bit more like cut and dry, like what are your metrics, what's your product, blah, 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 what's your churn? Whereas, yeah, I don't know, I've had a pretty easy experience once you actually get the meeting, yeah, so far.
So we're like an interesting use case because we're like an Australian startup in a US startup like Shell. So we went through Y Combinator, so that gives us like US cred. We are a Delaware corporation, so we're a US company. That was a big deal. I don't know if it's actually true or not, but we got reiterated a lot in that it's very weird for them to invest in a proprietary limited company. Like, what is that? Like, you know, it's so out of their normal realm. And obviously it's possible, but being a Delaware corp made it a lot easier for them to understand. They did still like raise questions, and we had a lot of investors who actually, or not a lot, several investors who passed just because of how far away we were. They're like, oh, we want to build that relationship in early stage, like being close to you is important. Like, we don't think we can help you as much if you're like, you know, 1,000 miles away. So that was a bit of an issue for some investors. I think this probably would have been a big, and this I can imagine difficult for you, is that pretty much 90% of the investors that we spoke to, one of the first questions they asked was like, okay, you're in Australia, that's okay. Where are your users based? If we had said we're only in Australia, I think there would have been a lot more pushback than we did receive. So most of our users are based in the US, and they're like, great, I know those are real people. Like that 40% that are not in the US, like they're fake. Like, you know, I don't know if they're real or not. And so that really helped us. And so I think going over there, like something that, echoing your point, like we've recently been to the US. We spoke to maybe 60 VCs over in the US, like 99% of them were through warm intros. That was through our existing network, founders that we know, people who've traveled there. Like maybe I sent out 30 cold emails and they got like several responses. So it was much less effective than actually getting warm intros. But there's something I want to actually talk about is when we went there for StartMate, something that I think Batco or someone who went there spoke about was you have to pitch like 150% the vision that you pitch in Australia. Like Americans just think fucking big. Like they think really big and very ambitious. And like it may or may not be real, but like if you're pitching investors who are hearing this, like we're going to take over the world, we're going to dominate this, we're going to build the next $100 billion business. And then you're like, yeah, we're going to be $1 billion. We're going to help a lot of people. They're like, that's not enough. Like that is, you're compared to that, like that is not enough. So that would be my recommendation. Like pitch as big as you fucking can. The US not swearing. I don't know if that was a rule that we were told, but shit. But yeah, pitch as much as you can, get warm intros, try to speak to us or whoever you are, like who has networks in the US, and potentially, I don't know, do Y Combinator. That was really helpful. It's easy, just do that.
How did you go about that recalibration? What did it feel like as a founder?
I think you sort of, after a while, you sort of, in the same way, just like always feedback cycles. There's always like, okay, you're pitching this, they didn't seem interested. You pitch a little bit bigger, they seemed interested. And like, it's just data and feedback loops and just speaking to mentors who can like talk about that. And I think internally just look inwards, like, okay, like, you know, tall poppy Australian things, like, which is going away, but like, how big could this get? Like, what does it look like if you're building a digital Pfizer? Like, how big is that? Like, is there going to be digital medicine? Yes, for a fact. And so what if that's you? Like that can be scary. And I think having that conversation with yourself and your co-founders helped us pitch it with conviction.
I echo the ambitiousness chat and the getting rid of tall poppy, which is huge. Like it's just got to get rid of it as an Australian. It's like inherent here. It's like, oh, you kind of play things down and stuff. And it's not like ego is a good thing. And like, you have to be an asshole, you have to be arrogant, but it's like this ambitiousness and like confidence that is, and it's not as binary as like Americans and Australians or one way or the other. It's not like that. But just anecdotally, the like US other founders we talk to and folks over there, it's just inherent like ambitiousness in the way they talk and talk to the vision and the things of like, mate, get off your high horse. It's never going to happen. Like as an Australian, that's the first thing you think of, like, get off it, mate. It's like, no, they actually believe that. And if you don't believe that about your own product, then don't pitch. You have to inherently believe you can be the biggest next whatever. And we found that as well. And I went a little bit different situation where we were raising because it wasn't cold outreach. It was sort of one intro to another. And we've got 3 lead US investors, so 2 US, 1 UK leads for our rounds. And we've actually told the Australian side, we actually had some investors tell us like, you know, you Australians are too nice. Like, and it's like, you don't have to be an asshole. You don't have to be arrogant. You don't have to be pricks to people. You don't have to be ruthless, but like, you sometimes you're a bit too nice. You just got to go after things a bit more. And it's like, but we are. It's like, yeah, not like I've seen it. So I'm like, okay, shit, can you what are we doing? Like, so there definitely is a bit of, I don't know if that's across the board, but just a couple of investors sort of told us that, not in a bad way, just like a, you know, step up kind of thing. But as a whole, all our raising was done through COVID and on Zoom, and we didn't really have some of those issues around, like, we're not dealing with an Australian company. We're not, you know, in the early days, I think we're probably fortunate because we're already profitable and set up and running and stuff for the first round. But yeah.
What a perfect final message. Step up, be more ambitious. So I think on that note, I'll thank the 3 panelists and hand back to the Stripe and Cake folks.